In Catholic eschatology, the four last things are death, judgment, heaven, and hell. And since every soul will experience 3 out of the 4, you'd better hope, work, and pray that you end up with the right combination. In Percy Shelley's poem Ozymandias and in H.G. Wells's novel The Time Machine, we see 2 versions of the wrong combination. I'm sure I am not the first person to notice the parallels between these 2 texts. Both of them have travelers who have come an impossibly far distance. Both of those travelers have seen ruins of once great civilizations, and both witness the humbling of human achievement by the inexorable progress of time. In other words, both texts span centuries. In Ozymandias, the death is of a civilization, but the judgment seems personal. The Pharaoh Ramses II was a great builder of monuments to his own glory, and many of the buildings that he erected still exist today and are still so impressive to us today that we put them in our own art. According to a really quick search, the temple Abu Simbel is in the James Bond movie The Spy Who Loved Me. The Luxor Temple is in the movie The Mummy, and the Karnak Temple is in the first Death on the Nile adaptation. Ramses II might be very happy to hear that all of these still stand today and that millions are put into their preservation for even more generations in the future. But that brings me to the first plot twist, which is that the traveler in Ozymandias is, or so I would argue, also a time traveler. The antique land he visits is what we would recognize as Egypt, but it is an Egypt in the distant future from us. The monuments I mentioned are no longer standing, and in fact, if you read the description, even the buildings of modern Egypt are no longer standing. Of all the great monuments of Ramses II, only one colossal wreck remains, while around it, boundless and bare, the lone and level sands stretch far away. It also seems as if the traveler and his listener don't quite know who Ozymandias is. Not only have they lost his monuments, they have also lost his memory. In fact, the imagery suggests that a colossal city built out of limestone and granite has been reduced to grains of sand. Meanwhile, the shattered face of the man who built it is lying half sunk in the sand, almost as if he was forced to watch everything he created slowly turn into nothing. For the sin of pride, he received the judgment of desolation, and this is his personal hell. In The Time Machine, on the other hand, the sin and the judgment are more general, or if you prefer, societal. It parallels the idea that along with each individual's particular judgment, there is a final judgment in which everyone is kind of subsumed. The idea is that there needs to be a final judgment because our actions don't just affect ourselves, but can often have repercussions and echoes until the end of time, as we see in the case of Ramses II, and also as we are still seeing in the case of the Industrial Revolution. In Wells' time, there was already a pretty clear division between the haves and the have-nots, or as he calls them, the capitalists and the laborers. The wealthy built their lives of luxury and ease on the toil and the less than ideal living conditions of the workers, and they rationalized that it was fair because they were exchanging labor for wages, when they probably were not much better than an ancient pharaoh commanding actual slaves. We could say that for the sin of greed, they received the judgment of cannibalism. Having once imposed their refined appetites on others, they now exist to feed the more brutal appetites of the latter's descendants. It is a general shared hell. It could end here, but Wells takes it further. After all, a novel gives him more freedom to extend the story than the sonnet form gave to Shelley. And what he does next is take the time traveler even further into the future, into an apocalypse, into the end of the world, or as far as he dares to go. And it is even more sobering than the fate of the Eloi and the Morlocks, because it's not just a fatal flaw that was followed into destruction. It is the end and the destruction of even fatal flaws. There's a sense of inevitability. Even if we could have arrested the inequality and the greed which led to the separating of the classes and the exploitation of the poor by the wealthy, even if we had done that and been able to prevent the division between the Eloi and the Morlocks, we would not have been able to prevent this. If 800, 2,000 years in the future, we see that human intellect and human achievement have become completely ineffective, we jump even further into time and see that human intellect and achievement are actually just futile. It's an apocalypse without a second coming, whether it's the second coming of Christ or even a second rallying of the human race to do something about the downslide before it completely destroys us. But the reason The Time Machine is still a beloved classic is that Wells does not leave us there. His final word is not a prophecy of ultimate futility. Although the great motif of The Time Machine is light versus darkness, with darkness seeming to win in the end, with the time traveler describing what he sees around him millions of years in the future as a remote and awful twilight, it is really not the final image that we are left with. Though to explain the final image, I have to jump back a little bit. So the journey into the future was not just one of intellectual tourism. The time traveler also made a friend. And that friend from the Eloi felt true affection towards him and liked to fill his pockets with flowers. And that did not seem like a very important detail until he returned to his own age, 1895, let's say, and found that the only thing he had brought back from the future, besides that creeping sense of dread, were the 2 flowers that she had put in his pocket. And the very last words of this novel describe these 2 strange white flowers, shriveled now and brown and flat and brittle, to witness that even when mind and strength had gone, gratitude and a mutual tenderness still lived on in the heart of man. And it's heartening that in a story that continually ups its own ante, so that just when we think we have heard the final word on the future of mankind, the final word on the death, judgment, and hell of mankind, the actual final word is these 2 flowers. It is the Eloi Venus flowers and the Eloi Venus love, which get to be the true last things.